Okay, let's get going. Had a lot of comments about our guest's last appearance on the program, Damien Dumar. We'll get to him in just a moment. The book is The Last Harvest. I tend to call it The Dark Harvest because it's last and dark. And it's quite a fascinating book. I don't know that I've seen anything quite like it. The Last Harvest, A Secret History of Lucifera, Aliens, the Illuminati, and the Fate of Humanity, by Lucien Mars, Lucien, Lucien Mars, the author. This is, again, a very disconcerting book to a lot of people. What if your beliefs about reality were all wrong? The secret history of angels, demons, aliens, and the militarized culture of fear in these final days. Lucien Mars reveals the secret history of humanity contained in an ancient Middle Eastern, I assume, stone or computer crystal known as a flaming stone. This is a good one. The final harvesting of humanity begins in 2025, which locks up perfectly with the Deagle.com projections. January 1st, 2025 is when the alleged new total will just about have been reached. And that total is achieved by whittling the world population of around 8 billion down to an alleged 500 million. And that's it. What we have here are a number of questions. What extraterrestrial power is behind the global elite? Now, that's a very profound and interesting question. What is the actual origin of the Illuminati and the Freemasons? What extraterrestrial empire is in control of them? And what are their plans for the elite once the New World Order has been achieved? The Last Harvest answers these and many other questions. It goes on from there, and I want to go down and look at, I'm on the page. You can get there by just going to the banner. It's right there above headlines. I want to read a review here. Let me find a review. All right, here are a couple of them. The Last Harvest, A Secret History of Lucifera, Aliens, the Illuminati, and the Fate of Humanity by author Lucien Mars is a book that made me think, reflect, and think again. The book and its content is kind of unique, to say the least, and I really liked that. While reading the book, many preconceptions changed, and that made me think a lot more. The book is not short or simple, so I advise you to read it with time and to give it all your attention. I think that this book is not aimed at everyone because you need to be flexible and have an open mind to understand and take into account other ideas. And another quick one. This was a truly mind-bending experience. The book presented a unique and intricate web of conspiracy theories that drew me in from the very beginning. This book provided a fascinating exploration of some of the most intriguing and controversial topics in the world today. That's a lot to unpack, and it is done in the book, exactly that. Somehow the author managed to create a coherent piece of literature with all of that thrown into it. The author's unique perspective and intricate storytelling made a truly engaging read. If you're looking for a book that will challenge your beliefs, then I highly recommend giving this book a read. So there you go. All right. Damien, welcome back to the program. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me back, Jeff.
Oh, yeah. How was, did you get any response from people you know about your first visit here? Our last conversation?
I have heard some responses that have gotten back to me, yes.
Yeah, well, we had a lot here, and people really liked the idea of being challenged, and I think this book certainly does that, The Last Harvest. It is a challenging read. I have not been able to finish it. I've looked at it, and anyway, I'm going, this is on my to-do list. We can talk about a lot, but ultimately, the bottom line here is 90% depopulation. How far along are you, in your mind, in terms of being able to see that goal met by, let's say, January of 2025? Are they on track at this point to do that? That means a lot of people have to go in the next 21 months.
Yes, that's correct. I think that it's important to point out that 2025 really marks the beginning of when their plan turns on. It's almost like turning on a car engine or beginning a trip. So 2025 is when all the cylinders are firing and the train starts leaving the station. When the train actually gets to the end of the line and they've achieved their goal, we're talking 2040, 2050. No one knows exactly for sure. But definitely by 2050, the goal will have been achieved. But we can start to see it begin around 2025. Because when you're looking at something like how do we get the world population down to a level of 500 million, there are pretty much three main vectors by which this can be achieved. So one of those vectors, of course, is World War III. That would involve a nuclear conflict.
Right.
And another one of those vectors would be famine through the control of weather and through the heavy genetic modification of our food supply. And the third vector, which we're very familiar with now, is viral warfare and, of course, vaccines, which are part and parcel with the viral warfare agenda.
Right. Well, they're bioweapons. We know who owns them. The Pentagon Department of Defense owns the primaries here, Pfizer, Moderna. They paid to have them produced. They are referred to as countermeasures, which is a military term. They are weapons. These are weapons of war. And the war is being fought against humanity. Do you think, Damien, that 500 million will be enough to allow the surviving elite to run this planet? Or would they be better off with 1 billion people? That's a very small number, in my view.
Well, 500 million may be a very small number when compared against the current world population of around 8 billion, but it's definitely more than enough to keep the show running, especially with the advancements in technology. One of the driving factors behind the urge to depopulate the planet is that the large numbers of people are no longer needed. We've certainly gone through the Industrial Revolution, and we've gotten to a point where the elite look and say, what are we going to do with all these people? We don't need them. So one of the solutions to that is global genocide.
We're also already seeing various large corporations, in my view, begin to cut back in anticipation of a much smaller retail consumer class, much smaller. Look at the major automakers, cutting back. Walmart closing stores, lots of stores, many more to be closed. You'll see. So they're reducing the amount of retail outlets and retail products because there aren't going to be the consuming numbers to buy them. That's pretty obvious to me. I don't know how you see it, but I don't know how else to interpret it.
Well, another thing that I do see is that in major cities such as New York and even in very small cities, you see office space lying fallow, where normally these office buildings would be filled with thousands and thousands of people, and those people are not coming back. And the initial story to that is, well, nowadays everyone can work remotely, but I feel there's something much more sinister behind that.
I agree. As publisher of this book, when did you first read it? Let me start there. How long ago, approximately?
Well, I believe the first time I read the manuscript was probably in November.
Oh, not that long ago. Okay.
No.
So you recognized right away that this had an incredibly important amount of information, a dramatic, dynamic message, and it had to go, and that's what made you want to publish it?
Well, it was more than that. I was involved with Lucy and Mars on other levels because my particular background is that I am someone who has Rh negative blood, and people who have Rh negative blood, there's a large alien genetic influence there. And so I had already gravitated into certain directions that led me to meeting Lucien Mars and working with him. So given that I have a background in publishing in the past, it was only a natural fit for me to take something this important and run with it, because it's really something that is critical to get out there in such a cohesive form, where somebody in one sitting can read a book and really have an understanding of what's going on this planet on so many levels.
Just for our newcomers, Damien does have reason to believe that he may well be an alien ET hybrid, human ET hybrid. They're all over the place, apparently. They're walking among us. We don't know. Rh negative is one of the alleged telltale symptoms of being not a full human anymore. You've been mixed, modified, and all the rest of it. Is Mr. Mars also Rh negative?
Yes, he is.
All right. What is the current approximate percentage of people who have Rh negative blood?
Well, it's around 10. It's around 10 to 15%, and this is one of the reasons why the elite wants to get rid of 90% of the population. It's because the only quote-unquote humans who still would have value to them would be the ones who have Rh negative blood. The reason for this being that someone who has Rh negative blood is capable of being hybridized, and therefore an alien race could graft their genetics onto this planet and take it for themselves.
Is that what's underway now, ultimately? We are being taken?
Ultimately, it is the plan of one specific group of aliens, which are commonly known as the Greys, which are really part of a greater coalition called the Nebu Grey Empire, who are behind the Illuminati and the Freemasons, and they are orchestrating the New World Order and the depopulation in order to bring about their ultimate goal of taking the planet for themselves.
Would this be the taller Greys or the shorter Greys, the 3-footers? You got some that are 4.5 feet tall. There are two groups.
There's actually more than two groups of Greys. People are maybe familiar with only one or two types, but there are other types, and they, of course, are also a very heavily genetically modified group.
Have you met personally, face-to-face, with any of these people? We'll call them people.
I have not met face-to-face with Greys, but there are many others that I have encountered, yes. There's certainly a lot of Grey. Yeah, there's certainly a lot of Grey hybrids that are around, which you may not notice immediately because they pass as humans, but they're actually not. So
I saw one once.
Oh, you did?
I saw, yes. No question.
Tell me about it.
Yeah, well, I was walking up sidewalk in Santa Barbara, about 15, 16 feet wide sidewalk, very busy, lots of people. And I had a friend to the right of me. A couple of people were behind me with my daughter. And I had a feeling I was in front, a woman was to my right, behind me was a couple, and then over on my right was my daughter behind me. There was two groups. We were two, and then we were three. And I looked over my shoulder. I had this feeling to turn around and look. And I looked at my daughter, and I looked past her, and coming up behind her, walking very fast through this very busy sidewalk with traffic, was this little boy. Looked like a little boy. He looked like he was 12 years old. He had khaki pants, I'll never forget this, a green plaid shirt, and a little, like a sailor's cap, which was turned down on his head. And he had a very thin mouth, a long aquiline nose, which I looked at it, and I didn't get it right away, what was different about it, but I noticed it. And this kid's walking up, and he's staring right at me. And he must have been 15, 20 feet behind when I first turned around. I had this feeling to turn around. And he stared right at me, and I watched him. He came up next to my daughter, and he was still staring at me. And then I noticed that his nose, the top of the bridge of his nose, didn't stop between his eyes. It went up to about the lower third of his forehead. All right, imagine your nose starting up above your eyebrows. That was it. It wasn't some ghastly deformity. It looked like it was meant to be. And he was staring at me, and he obviously wasn't a normal person. Obviously very intelligent. And the next thing I know, I'm frozen. I can't move. I'm just standing there, as are the people around me. And I looked forward, and the one woman in the back said, What is your daughter doing up there? She was about 40 feet ahead of me, standing in this flow of traffic. People were still walking except us. And she was turned sideways and looking right into the eyes of this little 12-year-old boy. He wasn't a little 12-year-old boy. He was about 4.5 feet tall, and he was staring into her eyes. They were about 8 or 10 inches apart, and my daughter wasn't talking. She was just, he was downloading her brain or something, okay? And the one woman behind me was able to break loose and ran up and grabbed my daughter and shook her and said, "What are you doing?" And the little guy, whatever it was, he simply turned and looked at me again and stared at me, and then turned and walked and headed right on up the sidewalk out of sight. My daughter, when we got up to her, I finally was able to walk. She said, "Did you see his eyes, Dad? Did you see his eyes?" And I said, "Yes." And we all walked on to the car. We were heading home after having dinner, and nobody in our group of 5 said one word about the event or the encounter. Not a word. We got in the car, drove home. It wasn't discussed. You've heard that format, I'm sure, many times. But that's my encounter with something that wasn't normal.
I would ask you 1 or 2 questions about that. Was the event never discussed because they didn't remember it, or because they just didn't want to talk about it?
I think they didn't want to talk about it. It was too strange. I think one person said, "That was really strange," and that was it. That was it. It wasn't as if they were shut down. It's just that it wasn't something that they felt no one wanted to talk about it. It was odd. Does that make sense to you, that encounter?
Yeah, definitely. Greys are notorious when they stare at you. They have how should I say, well, the close thing to say is it's very hypnotic, but it's actually far deeper than that and far more sinister than that.
Oh, I agree.
And
no,
yeah,
that was
it's something to be very cautious about.
I didn't have a chance. I mean, I was just stopped. And he had something to do with my daughter. I don't know what it was, but it's not the first encounter she had with a visitor, from my understanding.
It's possible that you and your daughter are Rh negative yourselves.
I don't know.
That would explain the interest. Because the aliens, like Graves, would not be interested in you if you weren't Rh negative.
Well, okay. He was. I looked at them, and they were, to me, from my perspective, my daughter was on the left, and this little guy was on the right. She was taller than he was, 4 or 5 inches maybe at the most, but he was really riveted into her eyes. I don't know what was going on, but there was information being transmitted and transferred. I'm obviously something was going on there. What it was, I never knew.
I think there's a lot for you to explore should you choose to explore it, and the first step in exploring it would be to get a blood test from someone who can verify that you and your daughter are Rh negative, and that would start to explain a lot of this. Okay,
I'll check into it. I will.
Just a thought.
Good. Yeah, no, good idea. Can you get an Rh negative blood test and pick it up at like a pharmacy or something and just do a little pin prick and send it in?
No, there may be some lab that does that, but I haven't heard of it. I'm not even sure if hospitals officially check for it. I can almost guarantee that they unofficially check for it, but I don't know if they officially check for it anymore like they did when I was born, where it would be on your documentation.
Right. Well, interesting. That happened about 8:30 in the evening on a summer evening on the sidewalk in Santa Barbara, and there was another event. I shouldn't even talk about this, but it I think it fits. And she would go visit her mother occasionally, and the mother had an upstairs downstairs townhouse-like rental, and there were 2 bedrooms upstairs, and my daughter would stay in her room upstairs, and I would go pick her up after the weekend visit, and bring her home. And one time I was bringing her home. I've never told anyone this. And she's in the back seat, strapped in with her seatbelt in her car seat. She's about 6. And I said, "Did you have a fun weekend?" "Oh, yeah. What did you do?" "Well, I played with my friend." I said, "Oh, you have a friend in the building." There's a complex of 10, 12 units, something like that, 2-bedroom units. And remember, this is upstairs. And I said, "What did you do? Did you go swimming?" No. He just came over and we played and we read books." And I said, "Really? Where did this happen? Where was your mother?" "Oh, she was downstairs or asleep or something. I don't know." And I said, "Where did this happen?" She said, "In my room upstairs." So I said, "He came to the front door and she let him in, right?" No. I said, "Well, I don't understand. How did he get in your room?" He said, "Oh, he came through the window. There's no stairs up on the outside. He came through the glass."
Well,
Second
Jeff,
story.
I'll tell you that she has had many more experiences with them than these. And grays, they will come right through the walls. The technology they have is incredible relative to what we would imagine. And I'm sure she has had many experiences with them. It's just these are the only ones that you have heard about or remembered, because it's very easy for them to delete the memories, or what they do is they implant what are known as screen memories. So you're given a substitute memory to cover up the actual memory. So if I had to bet money on it, I would say your daughter is Rh negative, and she is of great interest to them genetically, and that's why she has these experiences. And I think it's not a surprise that you suddenly, for the first time, talk about this, because it's probably the right moment, and it does indeed fit in with the contents of this book, as you have said.
Yeah, I had my own experience as about a 12-year-old kid, which I don't want to go into now, but it was very strange. All right. Talking with Damien Dumar here, the publisher of The Last Harvest, which is a book you can get easily on the homepage, and it's quite a provocative book, to put it mildly, speaking as a quasi-reviewer, and I haven't read it, but I've read enough about it that I have a good handle on it. And talking to Damien, this is our second interview, and he'll be back. We are at the threshold, the door threshold. We're walking into an entirely new age on this planet. I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it's bad. I don't know. I do know that bad things are happening. A lot of people are going to be leaving sooner than they otherwise would have. The latest projection is that anyone who's taken the bioweapon injection has now a 25-year shorter life expectancy. That's been talked about on the basis of early projections of data that have come in from people who have been injected, and how quickly they are deceased.
Yes, I was just watching some videos the other day on what they're pulling out of people's circulatory systems during surgery. Right. And I don't even know what I'm looking at, but that does not look natural and normal in any way, shape, or form.
Well, those are amyloid clots. They're made by the spike protein, causing regular proteins in the body to misfold, no longer actually able to do what they were supposed to do as proteins, and those misfolded proteins begin to aggregate together, forming little tendrils and then forming what looks like kind of a thin piece of, what do they call it? Calamari, squid, whatever. It looks like proteinaceous material because that's what it is. It's made of protein. It's not a blood clot. It is more of it looks like skin or meat or something like that. Most all of you listening have seen many pictures of these. They're on the net. So the spike protein is the most deadliest thing that humankind has ever created. It has many, many different ways of ending life. That's just one of them that you witnessed when you saw those the protein clots called amyloids.
It's interesting that you describe them as misfolded proteins because prions are also misfolded proteins.
Correct.
That transmit their misfolded shape onto normal variants of the same protein. And prions are very, what's the word I'd use, very omnipresent in our environment right now. And the book, The Last Harvest, goes into this whole concept of cattle mutilations and prions and the rise in Alzheimer's and other types of diseases of that nature. And what's interesting is that the American public was actually lied to about an embargo on Canadian beef in 2003 that was suspected of being tainted with prion disease. So contrary to an embargo happening, instead millions of tons of untested and possibly contaminated hamburger meat that was quarantined in Canada due to mad cow was actually brought over the border despite the FDA's concerns and consumed by Americans. So could this be why mad cow is never talked about anymore? Could this be why there's a rise in Alzheimer's? This is a massive prion contamination incident if it is in fact true.
Well, I have a great deal of background in the whole, we call them prions, but whatever, it doesn't matter, since they first broke out in the UK among the cattle. And I followed this from the beginning. I have projected that cattle mutilations are being done because of the type of organs that are removed from the cows, the tongue, the tonsils, the sex organs, some of the digestive tract is removed, it's cored out. These are all done like a textbook exercise. They're all the same. And not only cattle are being mutilated in that sense, horses, sheep, in South America, llamas. There have been a number of human beings found with the same exact mutilation pattern. So they're not just doing cattle. I think cattle are being done, you may know much more about this than I'll ever know, but it's my guess that whoever's doing it is tracking prion contamination throughout the environment. It's easy to model it and find it in cattle tonsils, for example, to see where it's spread, how it's being spread, is it being genetically mutated in any way? There are many, many questions to this. But is it your understanding that cattle mutilations and other mutilations are being done to track some biological entity, so to speak, such as a prion or prion, throughout the environment? Is that what they're tracking?
You're 100% correct. Not only are the organs that contain the highest amount of prions being surgically extracted, it's because there's not only an attempt to track the infections, but this is actually an attempt to make them more effective and weaponize them. Of course, nobody knows for sure, but the fact that this is being done systematically and surgically implies that those doing this may very well be seeking for a shorter, sure-kill variant of things like the Crutchfield-Jacobs disease.
Understood. Who's doing the mutilations? Is it ET and the military? Is it a combination? Is it another group? Do you have any understanding about that?
I'm not 100% sure, but it is definitely some facet of the military-industrial complex. So when people say military, they're usually thinking about the Marines or the Air Force, but really what military is a term for military-industrial complex, which of course does incorporate alien and extraterrestrial influences. It incorporates this whole range of possible actors. But the main thing is not so much who is doing it, but the fact that they're doing it for reasons that are serving depopulation and not in your best interest.
Why, and there are many different types of extraterrestrial species visiting here or living here, and they've been here for a long, long time.
Yes.
Why do they want to execute such a plan? No, I guess there's a pun intended there. Execute such a plan now? What's the timing aspect of this?
Well, it's a plan that they have been working on for a long time. I wouldn't say that they are executing this plan to meet some sort of magical deadline in the future. It just so happens that now is the time when this plan comes to fruition, even though this plan has been formulated a long, long time ago.
My understanding exactly parallels that. So, who's who? Who's on first? The Greys, the military-industrial complex working together. Are they the primary manipulators and fomenters of this whole thing? The population takedown, the mutilations, and all the rest of it. There's a lot going on here.
Yes, the primary driving extraterrestrial force would be what is known as the Nebu Gray Empire, because they have outposts here in the inner Earth, and they wish to take the planet for themselves, and they have been manipulating the Illuminati and the Freemasons since the beginning. And their goal is that once the Illuminati and the Freemasons have done their dirty work for them, well, then they'll just kill them off. So when you hear about people like Bill Gates talking about we must drive depopulation and vaccines and all that, well, Bill Gates may think that if he accomplishes his goal, then he will be sitting on top of all the land he owns and living in some sort of paradise. But as soon as he accomplishes his goal, they will cut his throat next, because this is just how they operate.
I've heard this a number of times being projected by various people who are scholarly in these kinds of fields, that they say the biggest suckers of all are those doing the dirtiest work, thinking that they're going to be protected, and they're
right.
not.
No, this is an operating procedure that the Nebu Gray have been running for a very long time. They did it back in ancient times to Marduk in ancient Egypt.
RH negative. There are certain groups of Jews who are RH negative. I don't know about the Ashkenazi. They have some kind of a genetic issue when it comes to the getting COVID. They're not likely to get it, or they don't get it at all. Is there an Israeli? I don't want to use Israeli only to the extent that that's where they tend to be aggregated now beside the United States. Is this a Zionist issue, an Ashkenazi issue to any degree? Because they are so much in control of so many things. We have to be honest about that. It's just a fact. Big deal. That's what they've gone after, and that's what they've done.
Well, before I get to that, let me say that people who are Rh negative, for the most part, will be unaffected by most strains of COVID, just like most people who are Rh negative will not be affected by the deleterious effects of the vaccine. And this is, of course, designed this way on purpose, because they are the only aspect of the human commodity that is precious to these various alien groups like the Nebu Gray Empire. As far as Zionists go, Zionism is, of course, more of a political movement than it is
Correct. Yes.
It's a Jewish political movement, but not all Jews would be considered themselves Zionists, and vice versa.
Right. Well, we have 45 million Christian Zionists in this country, Christian Zionists, so it's
right.
It's not an exclusive domain of anybody. Go ahead.
What the Last Harvest book points out is different groups of people were engineered by different alien factions. So in the case of the Jewish people, they were actually creations of the Anunnaki, as opposed to, let's say, Caucasians and blacks who were actually engineered by the Siakar Empire. Because at the time when, quote-unquote, humans were being genetically created on this planet, there was an alliance between these two groups who shared colonization of this planet. So when I suppose one could say that when Jewish people refer to themselves as God's chosen people, the question would be, well, which God are they talking about? And they would be talking about Yahweh. And Yahweh was a character that was often taken on by Enlil, who was an Anunnaki and a Wolfen prince. So he would portray himself as Yahweh and behave as if he was a god, and given the amount of power he wielded technologically and the fact he, quote-unquote, came from the sky, you could see how it would be very easy for people to look upon him as a god. But, of course, he was merely a very powerful extraterrestrial. So one of the groups that he created were the Jews. So the Jews often refer to themselves as God's chosen people, meaning they're chosen by Enlil.
Okay. All right. There's so much in this book. Let's talk about, you've given me a note here, 3 vectors that drive depopulation. And you mentioned them earlier, but we'll go back and take another look. Nuclear war, famine, and viral warfare, or in this case, the bioweapon warfare, which has been turned loose on the people. They were frightened with the virus into getting these shots, and these shots have nothing whatsoever to do with human health and well-being. They are weapons. So same thing by extension.
Correct. Well, I think this is probably a good point where I can talk about something that's very popular in the news right now and is very important in terms of the book, and that is the concept of artificial intelligence. Right. So when talking about artificial intelligence, I'd want to make a distinction between the depopulation agenda of the elite, which aims to exterminate 90% of the human population on the planet, and Armageddon itself, as referenced in the book of Revelation, which wipes all life from the planet, both human as well as alien. So, in other words, while there are many vectors at play that can bring about the depopulation agenda of the elite, such as nuclear war, famine, and viral warfare, there is one main vector that will bring about Armageddon, and that vector is AI. Now, there's a reason AI is being talked about so much lately, and that is because we are getting closer and closer to crossing the proverbial Rubicon from which there is no return and Armageddon commences. So the reason for this is that AI will ultimately decide to repurpose all physical matter on this planet as it sees fit. And this will include your physical biological materials, i.e. your body. And it will repurpose this physical matter to create in accordance with its will, whatever that may be. Now, the universal problem with this, besides the obvious planetary one, is that once artificial intelligence is done with this planet, it will, of course, start to build spacecraft and attempt to, quote-unquote, regentrify every other planet in the known universe. So there is actually a fantastic book written on this subject called Our Final Invention by James Barrett, which covers this in great detail. But the thing is, Jeff, do you really feel that all the other alien civilizations we unknowingly share the universe with will allow this to unfold?
No, not if it's as you've described. No, not a chance.
No.
So will they French fry the planet Earth and get rid of all the AI? Or will they come in and manage the AI surreptitiously somehow?
No, there's nothing to manage, and as we speak, there's actually enough combined firepower in the vicinity of this planet to turn it into another asteroid belt should humans foolishly continue to push the development of AI in the direction it is currently headed, which, of course, they will. It's simply inevitable.
They will. Whatever excuse the expression, humankind, has been able to do in the past, no matter how dangerous or deleterious to the rest of us, it has been done. They do it. Whatever it is, they'll do it. And you have a schism now between the Musk faction and the co-founder of Apple, Wozniak, and 1,000 scientists have signed a letter saying we need a 6-month moratorium on AI development and advancement to try to determine what the risks may be, what we're getting ourselves into here. That's keeping it very simple. On the other side of the coin, you have Bill Gates, who just put another $15 billion into AI development with his Microsoft people in January. So there are two diametrically opposed groups here. And I would unfortunately say that, as I said earlier tonight, actually, that if it can be done, it's going to be done. And Gates will also end up, when he begins to step away from his competition, they will be forced to come along or they're going to be left out of the money loop. They won't make the money. And that seems to be the big driver. Anyhow, that's how it looks from here.
Well, as a parallel note, it is interesting to point out that every other planet in this galaxy has a one-world government, which is not the same thing as a new world order. Now, given that Earth is the only planet with so many sovereign governments, actually dooms the planet because nations cannot possibly stop the development of AI for fear that another nation will press on and gain a tactical or competitive advantage over the other.
Right.
I mean, we saw this in the nuclear arms race between the USA and Russia in the 80s, and where both sides produced an endless nuclear arsenal that now sits around and poses an incredible threat, even though so far we have not had any incidents occur due to the fear of mutually assured destruction.
Right. Okay. Well said. You have Gates, and you have in 2021, $150 billion was put into AI development. So his $15 billion is 10% of that. It's small. That's not to say that whatever money is needed won't be available, because it will. They're going to push this, in my opinion, as fast and as far as they can. That's just the nature of human stupidity.
No, that's definitely true. I agree with that. And also there's the issue that human beings, especially human beings who are in positions of power and influence, like Bill Gates and even Putin, they are very easily influenced by aliens such as the Nebu Gray, because as we know, most presidents are Rh negative, which makes them even easier to be manipulated than the average person. This is why Putin has been very vocal of late that he will not hesitate to deploy nuclear weapons should NATO keep encroaching on the affairs of Russia. Because for somebody who has children such as him to even make statements like this and not realize the implications of a nuclear holocaust shows to me that he is under heavy influence by entities such as the Nebu Gray, because a nuclear war and a World War III definitely fits their depopulation agenda.
Oh, hand in a glove. I agree. We have over here an illegitimate, illegal, brain-damaged walking cadaver as a president. He's not Rh negative. He's brain negative, but he's not calling the shots. It's basically Obama, Valerie Jarrett, Susan Rice, et al., who live about a mile away in a mansion there in Washington, D.C. Whoever is controlling Obama has been doing so for a long, long time. We know this, and maybe 20, 35 years. Who knows, since he was a kid. So this is all planned, and it's all playing out according to the wishes of the controllers. That's what it looks like. I have been told that there is going to be a nuclear exchange, a war in Europe and in Ukraine. It won't be the same over here. We're going to be seeing the Poseidon underwater nuclear ignitions, which will drive a very, very large tsunami into the coast, East Coast, West Coast, major cities, which will be cleansed of most people and many of the buildings by unbelievable amounts of water, and then swept back out to sea. That's how they're going to fight it. So they don't have to end up with the ghastly radioactive contamination of the entire country. That's not going to serve anybody. So that's what I'm told at this point. So I don't know if it's right. It's only a guess, not my guess, because it came from somebody who allegedly knows, but that's the story. So underwater nukes here, 2,000-foot tsunamis. In Europe, a different story. They're going to use nukes straight out, apparently. Both sides.
Well, I can tell you that a few months ago there was a series of public service announcements being run in New York City informing people on what to do in the event of a nuclear attack. So my feeling is that someone knows something, yes. Yes,
I concur. We only have about 4 minutes left. Damien, what would you like to cover that we haven't covered so far?
Well, I think I would just like to reinforce to people that in terms of the last harvest, we see on the cover of the book the Georgia Guidestones. And I think that should really reinforce to people that this book is not a prophecy, it's a plan. And people should really listen to what Bill Gates is saying, what Henry Kissinger is saying, what the Bushes have been saying, and realize that this agenda to reduce the world population from 8 billion down to around 500 million starting in 2025 is a very real thing indeed. And they didn't carve it in stone for no reason. And there's a reason that someone attempted to blow up the Georgia Guidestones, because those individuals, whoever they were, they knew for sure that this was not a prophecy, it was a plan. And the beauty of the book, The Last Harvest, is that so much of the book is quotes from the elite in their own words. So it's not Lucy and Mars saying this. It's not me saying it. This is all the elites saying it, and they're all in lockstep. They're all using the same numbers, the same dates, the same thinking process, and it should be very alarming to people. And I believe it would be in their best interests if they were to pick up the book and read it. Plus, it's just a great read. You won't see anything like it on Netflix or in the movies, and it's not a Netflix series. It's your life. It's reality right now.
Well, that kind of research, pulling together actual quotes from people to sustain a basic argument or a plan in this case, is fascinating reading. Just really remarkable. I don't know the timeline exactly, but I do think the Deagle numbers are probably on the table. A lot of people could be gone very quickly in a nuclear war and or famine that would follow it, or maybe it would precede it. I don't know. And we do know now that it is said that every single person who got a viable injection of the bioweapon has myocarditis or pericarditis, and the life expectancy now is 5, maybe 6 years, maybe. And we're already 2 years into that in many cases.
And let's not forget the close to 1,000 FEMA camps that are all over North America. And let's not forget those plastic quote-unquote coffins that we've seen the photos of that for some reason the United States government is buying. What are they buying those coffins for? What are they expecting? Why do we have close to 1,000 FEMA camps that are capable of holding up to 30 million people? Someone's going to go into those camps. Could it be the survivors of the depopulation?
I don't know. Very interesting question. As you watch the flow of current events and you see the incredible, irrevocable push to force Vladimir Putin and Russia into a corner by which they will view themselves as being obviously threatened with an existential event, and they will fight. They have announced very clearly they will use nukes first if they feel they're about to be attacked. As you watch all this, what do you feel? How do you view this, and how do you process it?
Well, Well, the way I process it is that I recognize that it's all part of the plan, carved in stone for all to see.
Got it. Well, they did do that. That's for darn sure. They should have chopped those guide stones up and sold pieces off. I don't know why they allegedly destroyed them. All right, Damien, thank you for being here. We'll talk again, maybe next month. Thank you.
Yes, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, good night. Damien Dumar, publisher of The Last Harvest.